Hey guys, I'm Amna Nawaz live in New York. If you were watching that whole briefing, we saw there DHS Secretary John Kelly come out and give remarks, and then an extended question and answer period with the OMB director, Mick Mulvaney. At the end, though, you saw all those White House reporters basically chant, Sean, 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 looking for White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer to come out and take some follow-up questions. One of the correspondents actually went back and confirmed he was not coming out. So there it ends. The briefing is over. Your briefing breakdown begins now. Joining me live from Washington, D.C., ABC's political director, Rick Klein, who is keeping an eye on the action down there. Rick, that's not how briefings usually end, it's fair to say?
I think it's also fair to say that's not how they start. The whole situation today, surreal. And it has a lot to do with President Trump losing. Not whether or not he lost in negotiations, he lost a news cycle. And I think the frank admission from the OMB director that President Trump is upset over the way this has been portrayed, upset over the fact that the Democrats seem to be spiking the football, upset over the fact that it looks like Republicans were out negotiated by Democrats, that's driving some personal pique on the part of the president, where he's calling potentially for a government shutdown, a good shutdown, he says, sometime in September, and a defensive note from the White House trying to point out what they view as accomplishments in this spending bill. It has been a remarkable 24 hours or so of messaging between Republicans and the White House trying to claim various pieces of credit. It should be a good news story for them. They've got the lights staying on of the government, but instead there's a lot of squabbling going on right now, and I think a lot of a defensive posture on the part of the White House to try to say that President Trump did not get rolled.
Well, let's talk about that spending bill before we talk about some of that post-spending bill spin, which we're seeing now. Look, Mick Mulvaney came out and basically said all of the president's priorities that we wanted funded, save one or two, we got. We got an increase in defense funding, an increase in border security spending, including money for the wall, and an increase in funding for school choice. So how are Democrats claiming victory right now?
Well, you have to put a whole bunch of asterisks next to most of those claims. Yes, more money for defense spending, but none of the budget cuts that he called for in NIH funding, National Institutes of Health. In fact, there's more money, a couple $2 billion more just for that funding. There is full funding of Obamacare, not a, quote, bailout, as Mick Mulvaney said, but they're able to maintain those subsidies that have kept Obamacare afloat. On the issue of the border wall, it's very clear in the language that this cannot go toward new construction of any new border wall. This is keeping ongoing in terms of staffing, in terms of new beds, and as Mick Mulvaney said, in terms of maintaining already physical barriers. I thought it was interesting that he brought that picture out and then was unable to say even where that construction is going on. They have not gotten the down payment on the border wall. They may have gotten some pretext, some initial first steps, but there is nothing in this bill that allows new wall funding. That's the bottom line. Also on Planned Parenthood, the president was very clear. He wanted to defund Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood gets to continue its federal funding through this bill. So there's a whole lot in here that Democrats have been happy with. It basically maintains the status quo when it comes to spending. And frankly, President Trump gave in on a lot of these areas. Now, you can then point to the political reasons for it, and there were lots of them. Mick Mulvaney mentioned one, you need 60 votes in the Senate. Another, they can't control the hardcore conservatives in the House. They need to depend on Democratic votes to get this through. But for whatever reason you point to on this, President Trump had to give some. And I think it's remarkable that they went from a posture of this was a good negotiation to President Trump is upset that he is being portrayed as having lost in negotiations, and therefore it's okay that he's calling for a shutdown. That's quite a pretzel to twist yourself in.
Well, let's fill in some of those details now. We heard Mick Mulvaney say there in response to questions about tweets from the president this morning, basically saying that the government needs, or the country needs, a quote-unquote good shutdown in order to kind of fix itself or recalibrate or whatever. We heard people ask Mick Mulvaney about it. He said, I think what you were seeing there was a sense of frustration at how Democrats were talking about that. So are we led to believe that every time he feels badly about how people are talking about him, the president will call for the government to shutter its doors?
Maybe that's one conclusion. I think there's also an irony in a president known for his name-calling being upset that Democrats are saying that they won in a round of negotiation. I don't remember that page from The Art of the Deal. Maybe we'll get enlightened on that from the president going forward. That's what part of what makes this remarkable, is that the tweet storm this morning and right through the briefing, it all appears to be a response to the fact that the president feels like he's being portrayed poorly. He lost a news cycle, and he is lashing out back at Democrats that went with him on this. That, to me, is remarkable, and it puts the White House in a very strange position of now trying to defend what is a, quote, good shutdown. That's the White House position. Mulvaney saying it might be a good shutdown if it changes fundamentally the way Washington is done. But I heard from a whole bunch of Democrats in the wake of the tweets this morning, they're already going to point the finger. If there's a shutdown or threats of a shutdown this fall, the next time the fiscal year funding comes up, guess whose feet it will lie at? The President of the United States, who's now on record saying that may be what the country needs.
Well, let's talk about that fiscal year 18 spending now. We know we're funded through September, right? We know that, as Mick Mulvaney said, in this spending bill, there's $347 million just for the wall. There were a lot of questions about the wall, specifically because he brought out big pictures of the wall or versions of the wall, even though we didn't get a lot of details around those pictures. But does this come up again in September? Is that when this can gets kicked down the road to say, okay, now can we get money for the wall that he said he would build?
That's undeniably the way that it has to break down now. The only way you're going to do something like this is to get it funded. It's one thing to authorize, and there is lots of authorization now for border security, including physical barriers in good portions of the south and southwest border. But to actually get it done, you need money. And that's the fight that President Trump is now going to have to wage this fall instead of now. And look, they have a point here to some degree, Amna, because this is still leftover business from the last Congress. This goes back to the fiscal year that started in October. This was supposed to be done before the election. Congress didn't get its job done then. It gave President Trump kind of an extra bite. He was unable, though, to deliver on that. And that's where this has to then move on. But the issue with appropriations, as well as so much in terms of legislative priorities, is that a new president is at the maximum of his influence typically. And with every passing day, every passing week, with other issues arising, it's harder and harder to get your priorities through. We're past that first 100 days. We're past now that first budget cycle. It's going to be harder to make that case. They're going to try. They're going to make the case to the public. But that is now the line that's been drawn, and it has been redrawn for September instead of now.
So this is one of those good points of time where we like to look back and say, okay, what would a shutdown actually look like? Unfortunately, we have been through one recently, and this is where we should bring in our colleague and friend Karen Travers, who is down in Washington, D.C., covered the shutdown back in 2013, and was reminding us of all the many lessons learned from our coverage back then today. Karen, thanks so much for being here.
Good afternoon, Amna. $24 billion. That's what the estimate was for how much that 16-day government shutdown in October 2013 cost the U.S. economy, about $1.5 billion a day. Another big number I think that you'll point to is the polling information. Republicans got overwhelmingly blamed for that shutdown. So the fact that it's now being discussed again as a potential political tool is certainly not going to be welcome news to Republican leaders up on Capitol Hill.
And Rick, over to you now. I mean, part of this is optics, part of it is messaging. Can the president walk back a call for a good shutdown, knowing all these facts are now going to be reported out? It was not good for anyone that the government shut down back when it did.
President Trump has not yet made a statement that he has made that he has been unable or unwilling to walk back if necessary. The fact even that it was in quotation marks in his tweet, to some people who are look at his tweets with Kremlin-like curiosity, it might mean something, and maybe it gets redefined. Next time Sean Spicer's up there, I'm sure the question will get asked, does he actually mean a shutdown, or does he mean something else because it was in quotes like he did on wiretapping? So look, he can walk it back however he wants. The words are out there, and they are words that are going to be remembered for a long time by Democrats. Already the finger-pointing beginning over who would be responsible for a shutdown if or when it comes to that.
And Karen, you were offering a wealth of information about the wide-reaching impact back in 2013. I mean, this was not just about federal employees and government functions. There's a huge spillover to the rest of civil society, right?
The ripple effects were felt all across the country. I think in the lead up to the shutdown back in September of 2013, there was a lot of talk about how this would impact Washington. Of course, the bulk of the federal workers are here in the nation's capital, but there are federal employees all across the country. Overall, 800,000 federal workers were kept off the job for those 16 weeks. And in fact, the budget director, Mick Mulvaney, at that briefing just a few minutes ago was asked about that. And he very defensively said they all got paid. They all did eventually get their paychecks, but it's kind of besides the point, that image of all those federal workers not going. Tourists, all the national parks were closed. Monuments here in Washington, the lawn wasn't getting cut on the National Mall because the Park Service wasn't working. And that has a trickle-down effect then for businesses. You know, if you're the local sandwich shop near a national park in some state, then nobody's coming. And you saw that. That's how that $24 billion number got tossed around. It wasn't just actual work here in the nation's capital, but a significant impact. A couple other bullet points. School lunches were scaled back. We talked to aid charity workers in other states, not here in D.C., who said they relied on federal government money, and once that shutdown started on October 1st, those grants just dried up. And some charities, Catholic Charities example, down in Louisiana, say their phones started ringing from military bases, military service members who suddenly were looking for some assistance while their checks were on hold.
So here's the thing. I'm going to throw this out for the sake of discussion. And then Rick and Karen, I'd love to get your take on this. This is a man who ran on changing the way Washington works. And by a lot of accounts, he has, right? Business as usual is no longer a thing in Washington. Now, Mick Mulvaney in today's press briefing basically said, look, if this is what it takes, if a shutdown is what it takes, the president believes that that's what we should do to kind of reset and make Washington work to some degree. So, Rick, just give me your take on that. If it didn't work back in 2013, could it be different now?
I think President Trump is clearly signaling that he's willing to try. I'm actually surprised that things went as smoothly with funding as they did over the last few weeks, because there were a lot of signs pointing to the negotiations falling apart. It seemed like even when the Hill was getting close, President Trump would lob tweet bombs into the middle of that equation. And it seemed like we were getting further apart even as the sides were getting closer together. I think clearly now he's laying it out there. And I think you hear from Mick Mulvaney, you hear from White House staff, they see these showdowns as potentially good things for President Trump and his brand. The history of shutdowns has not been kind to the party in power, but a lot of folks do remember that shutdown that Republicans were largely responsible for in 2013. It didn't cost them control of Congress. A lot of the worst fears were not realized. You have some alternate evidence about the shutdown during the Clinton years did hurt Republicans who were the party that were driving it. So shutdowns tend not to work for the party in power. But if President Trump's definition of that good shutdown is one that changes things fundamentally, I'll tell you, there's a lot of voices in that White House, Amna, that would take that.
And Karen, what about you? I mean, I'm sure all those members of Congress who remember what it was like during those last 16 days are not eager to go back to that point.
Yeah, certainly not, Amna. And I think when Rick called it a tweet bomb, that's exactly right. I mean, we shouldn't even be talking about a government shutdown. There was a bipartisan budget deal. There was a compromise reached to avoid that. President Trump himself, he could cause a shutdown this week if he really wanted to. He could veto that bill if he's so unhappy with the agreement that was reached. So over the last 24 hours, it's been relief here in Washington that there wouldn't be a shutdown. They were able to come up with this agreement. And then President Trump throws out that tweet and just kind of blows up the entire issue. And then a couple hours later, complete whiplash. He suddenly likes the compromise. He said this is a big win for America. It's hard to figure out what the strategy is, or if there is one at all. There are two Republican senators that were talking to reporters, I guess, up on the Hill, Bob Corker and John McCain, and both expressed their frustration with the president's tweets, saying, we wish he'd stop before he types and maybe somebody could take his phone away. It certainly adds a couple layers of complication to what were already very difficult negotiations.
Hey, Karen Travers live at the White House for us. Thanks so much for being here, Karen.